Hey, what's up, guys? I'm doing this video. Figure I would do this. I'm keeping with the themes of the unsung losers, I guess you'd say. Arkham Reporter wanted to see this too. The Japanese tanks, right now, the Japanese tanks were probably considered the most of a joke of any nation that was still in the fight until the end. The tanks just didn't do good in combat, particularly against their main opponent, the Americans. Although they did fight the Soviet tanks as well and had similar issues. A lot of it, just like Italy, a lot of it was their tanks were developed in the 30s, and just as the war paced on, they just could not, upgrade their tanks quick enough. There was a lot of other things as well. When you finally get a good tank out, it's already being outpaced by what America or the Soviet Union or what Britain is putting out. Also, which is well known in terms of these strategies. Okay, the Soviet Union, fighting the Soviet Union was something that was abandoned pretty much, and then they went after these other areas in terms of defense against their enemies, being the Americans and the British to a lesser extent. The Navy, the Japanese Navy, and the Air Force got the majority of the funding. Of course, the infantry and the armor got much less. But still, let me go through real quick the Japanese tanks. They had a number scheme, and here's the one of the last ones made. This was like kind of like a medium heavy tank. This thing could have fought the M4s more successfully, but it was the ones that when they were finally made, they were going to be used to defend the homeland from the invasion that never occurred because of the surrender. And so their tanks are kind of on a number scheme. The 89. The 89, look at this thing. This is like a World War One tank. Right? Literally. And you got like this weird, unique Japanese turrets where that's a machine gun at an angle. Why they did that, I don't know. So, and this one here, look at this. The cavalry tank, the 90. This was not a successful design. But let me tell you something. This would be something that you'd like to have in your. Wouldn't mind this thing in my, in a backyard or something. You could do stuff with this. Don't make your own tanks, I'm telling you. Of course, the tankette craze. You can we'll make these little machine gun 2-man tanks, right? The Italians had tons of those, okay? These just one had a turret. Against the Chinese, these were more effective, okay? But you start tanking with, I don't know, the Soviets, you have problems. You have the Type 95. This is the famous one you see a lot. Another small tank, 3-man tank, again with that crazy turret. And a 97 tankette, right? A 2-man tank. This is a cool looking tank. This is something looks like something you could have, right? But of course, the Type 97. This is pretty much the last tank in the field that is made by the time they already get wildly left behind. You have the Type 97 with this turret here. It has a 57 millimeter cannon. Then you had this upgraded one with the 47 millimeter cannon. Now, why would the number go lower? Well, this was a better anti-tank gun. This was a better high explosive gun. And most of the tanks were used to support infantry, but frequently would run into other tanks, particularly when they had the battles with the Soviets in Manchuria, which the Japanese pretty much lost. They were greatly outnumbered, though. It was in terms of what they lost a lot of their tanks. It was almost kind of even, I would say. But the Russian 45 millimeter gun was much better than what they had at the time. That's why they wanted to make their 47 millimeter. The 47 millimeter gun was also the ones the Italians had on their tanks. Of course, I guess a different version, but already outpaced by the time that you're getting into like 42, 43, where America is now in the war, and the Germans are preoccupied fighting the Soviets. And like this tank here, this is a cool looking tank, right? It looks almost like a 48T or something, but this is pretty much the last tank they had in the field. So this is the Japanese tanks. And of course, everyone gets an idea. Put a bigger gun on a chassis. You get the self-propelled gun, the assault gun, whatever you want to call it. You get this one, right? I showed before. You get a bigger one, right? But these were never used, right? You get this cool tank. Navy had a tank they made. This one here, okay? And this one here, this was not even a tank, but they had the idea that this thing was going to have torpedoes on the side and was going to sink American ships. Can you imagine with this thing doing that? So, and you get the cool art. Like, look at this thing. Look at this awesome tank. Now, unfortunately, these didn't do too well in combat either, but mostly because they got caught trying to counterattack which is the Japanese strategy of the waterline, which got them in trouble. Eventually, the waterline strategy was the Americans would land on the beach. You were going to hold them there and have your tanks knock them off. But unfortunately, you weren't the Wehrmacht. So all these counterattacks got wiped out. Okay, essentially because you have no armor. American anti-tank grenades that are attached to rifles can damage your tank and mess you up. And bazookas and 37mm cannons just knock you out. So there was really no chance. Although obviously these were more of a match with the M3s. The 95 was a huge tank. Right? They got the Japanese strategy was to let the Americans come in and ambush them with your tanks hidden, almost like basically becoming like movable pillboxes, right? Gun emplacements. It was the only chance they really had against their heavier American tanks. And there's one of the amphibious tanks. 3 of these went on the beach here to counterattack here in Saipan. Unfortunately, the flares went up and these things got shot to pieces. You can see. So we'll go into an actual battle here, okay? Where once again, like I'm at this point in my life, I'm rooting for the Japanese. Right? What kind of white man am I? They have no chance, but these men are heroic. But at every level, they do not have a chance against the material quantity and quality arraigned against them. But this one here focuses on the Type 97. This was the last tank that you had in the field. And if you look, okay, you get one here knocked out. Now, if you look at these 2 tanks, okay, the 97, it kind of looks like it could sort of like, it wouldn't be so outmatched. It's not like a little Type 95 that they would put on the back of this thing to show how bigger and better they were. This thing looks like it could sort of do something, but in reality, there's no armor on this thing. Like I kept saying, the anti-tank grenades that they attach to the rifle would penetrate these things. And here's a picture of the 95, right? The Impel-U. These daylight counterattack to try to take the airfield. Just getting annihilated by the Americans. Had better firepower. So now in this battle here, Battle of Luzon, largest tank battles between the Japanese and the Americans. In this case, not the Marines, but the Army. Okay, and there's an interesting thing in there later, but of course the M4. This is like a Tiger tank next to this other tank here. So this would have been a much better match, but essentially the Japanese realized this at this point. The main commander here, you have these 47mm equipped tanks. You also have the infantry, and this is another story. The infantry have these 47mm cannons. Okay, the orders were strict this time. Okay, in this battle, the Japanese tanks were going to hide. They were going to control. They were going to have what they call extreme fire discipline. They were not going to fire on the attacks and do counterattacks. Unfortunately, when Plan B happened, which was frequently because they didn't have infantry, there wasn't enough infantry on Luzon. The Japanese would go back to what they knew, which was to banzai and then get blown to shit. But here's an example of what the 47mm could do. This is one of the M4s knocked out by a bunch of these things. Where when the Japanese were successful, they would ambush the Americans by camouflaging the tanks and having them in these things called revenant positions, which making them sort of like what they did in Iwo Jima as well, making them like pillboxes. Okay, the waterline strategy I mentioned before was gone. You were going to draw the Americans in and ambush them because it was the only chance you had. You probably weren't going to win. You were going to make them pay, and the Japanese did make them pay. Right. So we'll go to like a little example of battles here. And they say this thing would have done much better, but you only had 2 of these things. Right? These things, of course, these are the M4 conversion for an assault gun. The howitzers, these were well liked because when this thing was shooting into the jungle, it would knock all the jungle away and reveal the Japanese tanks. And also, this thing could easily blow these things apart. So the whole idea was the strict fire discipline was what was ordered, and when it worked pretty good, right? Here's one of the 3 M4s knocked out in an ambush by Kojiro Wada's platoon, right? And of course, the battle here, the fire and quick session, they assembled two of the M4s, right? They did a good job. But here was the problem. One of the M4 guys guided the frontal armor in front to block the other damaged tanks and engaged them, knocking the Japanese tanks out one by one. The Japanese tanks continued fire, and they shot 60 rounds, with the rounds bouncing off the thick frontal armor of the M4. I know the Germans are laughing at this, but but a lot of these guys survived, but they lost all three tanks. But they still did a number on the Americans. Okay. Here, and of course, one of the interesting things too was the M4 had a telescopic sight and a periscope sight. The periscope sight allowed you to get to see a bigger area, to see what was the layout. The Japanese tanks only had the telescope sight, so the gunner could see in front of him, but other than what the commander could see through a viewport, there was no periscope. You couldn't see the big picture. Okay? And you had basically the different battles of the groups that were broken up. Of course, these were Army guys. Right? The Army guys were not coordinated like the Marine Corps tankers. The Marine Corps was doing stuff a year ago with their tanks. And much better integrated with their infantry. Okay, the Marines were able to integrate their infantry, their airplanes, and their tanks together because they were all Marines, right? But the infantry, the tank guys were kind of not united. So a lot of times the infantry thought the tank guys would leave them to rot, and then the tank guys thought the infantry guys were always hiding. So they didn't work together too well. You had other little battles here too. Yes, particularly in this battle with this one group here, the Americans got beat. They actually got repulsed a lot. They lost tanks, particularly the one battle here, where they actually lost two. Right, the Japanese made a good account in some of these battles. Okay? Sometimes the American tankers thought they were invincible to them. I like this one here too. The American infantry secured perimeter. The 7th Tank Regiment's maintenance sent out a suicide penetration team with a lunge mine. That was basically a mine on a stick. Okay, and you set the mine off, which meant you were dead pretty much. Okay, how do I feel about this kamikaze suicide attacks? I'll do that for another vid. So. All right, and I'll round out here with this battle here. Another one where they were successful. Pretty much most of these tanks, they try to do what they can. They get surrounded. They get outflanked. They try to escape at night, right? And they all get caught out there and get wiped out, usually with flares. Like I said, everything the Americans had could knock these things out. The infantry knocked out a lot of these things. Okay? Like I said before, the American tankers, they feared mines and they feared the infantry more than the tanks. But when the Japanese tanks held to their fire discipline and they were used well, they were able to inflict things. Just like this battle here. There's a battle where the Japanese won. Okay, I'll just end it with this. Right? The Japanese tankers exercised strict fire discipline and withheld fire until the Americans had reached only about 150 yards from them. Camouflage on the positions were thorough. Okay. Tankers were well aware that guns were ineffective against the front armor. They could penetrate the side armor. And then they attacked. Right? Several tanks were hit. One M4 was destroyed. 4 more were damaged. One fell into a ditch. They got bogged down, and the rest of the tanks withdrew. So the Japanese won that battle against superior American tanks. And pretty much the last, it's funny too. The last tank battle in World War II with the Japanese was actually after the surrender, when the Soviets tried to grab those Karelian islands, and the Japanese had surrendered, but they were ordered to defend themselves if attacked, and the Russians were attacking them, so they fought back, lost a bunch of tanks, but killed a bunch of Russians, or Soviets, I should say. And this battle here too, the last one, when they converted their last tanks to kamikaze weapons, Type 97 and Type 95, and they went at them. Unfortunately, apparently the bombs didn't work well, but they still knocked out some of the tanks before they were all shot to pieces, essentially. So that was the last thing. And look at this cool thing. This is like a monster. That's a like an engineer tank. So, and that was the Japanese tanks. Like I said, most of them were hidden here as pillboxes, pretty much doomed, but fighting to the end for the Emperor.